Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here virtually and in person. One of the biggest goals around this cafe was to really bring people together to talk about a lot of issues that are occurring in our world and society today. With everything going on, the mass shootings, um, you know, wars. I mean, at the community level, we still have the ability to reach out and touch people, to bring people in, to help people. So the idea was to really try to get these cafes back going because they were very successful pre-pandemic, and just start moving these conversations forward into action. So tonight's cafe, the criminalization of homelessness, or in housing, it's a must needed conversation considering we have, Super Bowl coming up. We have rent increases and a number of other things that's really forcing people into homelessness. And then when Super Bowl comes around, as you've seen in LA, the number of people who were basically picked up and removed off the streets just to get them out of eyesight for tourism. So tonight, I have a good friend of mine. He's here, David. He's taken on a new position, and he's doing some work with some of those who are impacted by homelessness. And then also somewhere on here is Wendy, the Justice Center. Is she?
Oh, wait, she's not on yet.
Oh, she's not on yet. So we'll hear from some of those who are in direct service, sheltering and heat relief cooling center. So, with that being said, welcome everybody. Put your name in the chat box and what you do, and we'll eat some food for you.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. Thank you, Khalil, and thank you, everyone. So our format for this evening and for the future, especially when we get technology worked out, is going to be 2 to 3 directly impacted. And we view directly impacted around criminalization, not only folks who have who've been criminalized for being unhoused or have had a difficulty finding housing once they have been criminalized, but also those direct service providers, because we are all impacted by what happens in our community. We are not separate from each other, right? And that's something that here at AFM we talk a lot about. So all of our conversations for the rest of 2022 will be based around these conversations. We'll have one specifically, hopefully we're in the works of informing what can we do to advocate for folks around the time of the Super Bowl in lots of different ways. But it is also a conversation. It's not just a presentation and a brain dump. Paulo Freire talks a lot about people having information dumped in and then they leave with nothing, they leave empty. So we are going to continue to learn as a collective in one space from 1 or 2 people a meeting, but then we're going to have larger questions. And so after about a 10 to 15 minute presentation, we'll jump into breakout rooms. We'll send you all into breakout rooms with a big question to ask, and you all can have a conversation. We'll come back and we'll share. And then we're going to embrace something new. We're going to embrace something called the embodiment of justice work. What does it mean for us to have had these presentations, for us to be in dialogue with one another? And what does that mean about the spirit of action moving in us? And so that's what tonight's evening will look like. Before we get started though, before I give a blessing and turn it over to Cleo to give an introduction to our first speaker, does anybody have any questions for me? And if so, if you are online in Zoom and you have a question, you can pop it into chat or you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask the question. Anybody in the room first? All right, anybody in that room first? No? Hello, Reverend soon-to-be Dr. Kimberly Scott. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us this evening. So wherever and however you find yourself at this moment, I invite you to settle in. Find a way in which to be connected to Mother Earth beneath you, Father Sky above you. Allow that sense of dignity that is inherent with your first breath to well up inside of you. Allow it to wrap its wonderful warmth and strength around your spine. Allowing you to feel supported. Not only with the energy that is around us, but also with the ancestors that have come before. Those who are supporting you in the work that you move forward in the journey to honor the dignity of all humans, especially those directly impacted by white supremacy, by patriarchy, by toxic faith practices, by the lack of ability to dream and imagine a new world. But we are here to dream. We are here to love. And we are here to embrace and support one another. It is in whatever name you give sacred space and names to. Amen and amen. Mr. Khalil, who is our first speaker for this evening?
So first speaker, good friend of mine, been around for a minute. And when I say a minute, I mean a long minute. No, and I'm always pleasured. It's always a pleasure to work and be around. Call him a good friend, a partner. And, you know, he's doing some really amazing work on the ground. And without further ado, Khalil Rashidon, no, David Shepherd. Oops.
I did that, right? Hello, everybody. By the way, my name is David Shepherd, and Khalil talks about how long I've been around, and I've been around a minute. A minute for me to count, actually, but at the same time, the minutes that I have spent being around, I also was am formerly impacted, but I've been out of prison now since, let me just say over 40 years. I went in 1965 for the first time, and that still is a stigma for me, because first of all, Arizona doesn't have expungement law, so even at this moment, after being out 40 years, getting my rights restored in 1985, if I'm trying to rent a place, first of all, I have to be honest about it, because I'm not going to find it sooner or later, but it still impacts me getting into places. So I've been working in this field now for a long time. And right now, and I just got a new position. I won't talk about the positions that I've had before, but it's also been working with people that have been formerly incarcerated. But due to Khalil, who is a real good friend of mine, a position came open down at CAS, the Human Services compound, and I decided, I'm going to apply for it, even though I worked at CAS about 35 years ago, when they didn't even have the compound. They just had the big shelter, which used to be, before the shelter, it was the Department of Economic Security, where they gave out food stamps and stuff. That's how long ago that particular thing was there. And I will tell you that homelessness is not something new. The numbers are definitely astounding, and it is new, which is based on a lot of things. But for the most part, it's the criminalization of people that's in the homeless situation. When I got down to the Human Services compound, which is where CAS is located, I was like shocked, and I couldn't believe, because a lot of people see it on TV, they see the tents, and they see all those things, and they see all those people, but they have no idea the magnitude of the pain and suffering that they're going through. There's a lot of different reasons for that. Right now, there's more people homeless because of the rent increases, which is not regulated by anybody, but it is just astounding how much people are having to pay for one-bedroom apartments or anything else. The other thing is about that is that seriously mentally ill. I mean, when you walk through that area, it's sad. My thing is that the agency that I work for right now, their whole thing is to end homelessness. That's their whole philosophy. How can we do this? How can we make that happen? Well, inside this compound, which a lot of people don't know also, there's a number of agencies in there that I've never seen it doing work like this. People that are on those streets right now, people that are homeless right now. Inside that human services compound is community bridges, people can get, they have a mail room there where people can get their mail delivered to them. They have the DES is there. They have where people can get their birth certificates. They can get their social security cards. So a lot of things are happening to try to eliminate some of the homelessness. The other thing that I was surprised about when I started to work there was the amount of people there, the amount of caring, the amount of people that's passionate about doing something about what's going on. And it's really happening in there. They now have a new shelter besides CAST. It's called Respiro, which is one that is on the way to getting people into housing and things like that. And my position is working with veterans with housing that have been convicted of felonies. So that's the position I have, but being in the situation that I've been in, I want to work with everybody that I can reach out and touch in some kind of way to help them. There's new laws now that people don't know about. And even when people try to get some of the things like get their rights restored and stuff like that, Governor Ducey did sign this one thing about the restoration of rights and different stuff like that. But one of the things now is that if you're from out of state prior to this year, if you're from out of state and you wind up in Phoenix or in Maricopa County and you had a charge in California or wherever, you would have to go back there to get that stuff. Yeah, you would have to go back. Now you don't have to do that anymore. You can do it right here in Maricopa County. So there is progress. But it takes people like us, it takes people that's listening to me right now out there communicating and helping push this whole movement. This is a movement. And I'm not too sure how long this might take, but my faith and my belief is that I always tell people, I do my best and let God do the rest, because there's just so much that we can do. I also say things like it's hard by the yard, but it's six by the head. Check out all these little things that I say to move people around a little bit. But at the end of the day, what I'm doing right now and what I'm looking at right now is saddening. But even though that's happening, when I see somebody that's moved from the homeless situation into their own place or into a setting like that, we moved a couple of people in a place I did like a couple of weeks ago. And this guy was so excited just about seeing or having a bathtub. I could not believe, he was ecstatic. A bathtub. These are the types of things I think that will move us. These are the types of things that people could hear, they would know. The day I went outside the compound to where all the tents were, and there was a lady out there. I was kind of scared of what she was doing. But she had a stack of dollar bills. Doesn't seem like a lot of money, but she was giving people a dollar bill. And as the word got passed around to the people that was in the tents, just lots of people started heading that way just to get that $1. Just to get that $1. My fear was, I thought, what if somebody reached and grabbed that and ran with it? Then I thought to myself, if they do that, everybody that was wanting those dollars is going to chase them down anyway. So I left her out there and just went on back inside. But this is the type of work that I'm doing as we speak. And this is the type of work that I'm going to continue to do. I don't see no reason why at 78, which is what I'll be in about 15 days, Why are you laughing, Camille?
I'm smiling.
No, you're not laughing. Anyway, I'm gonna do this for the rest of my life. My body will tell me, God will let me know when my time is up for doing what I am doing. But at this point, all I'm trying to really get across to folks is that there is answers. There is ways. There are things that we can do to mobilize each other, to mobilize the community and come in and help. Numbers count. Voting is one of the major issues also. That counts. When it comes to county attorneys, when it comes to judges, when it comes to all of these people, we have to look at who, what, when, and where, and how their attitudes are, and what they think about, and how much they care about human beings. Because that's how I see everybody that either touches my life or I touch their life. They're just another one of God's children and another human being. So I'm dedicated and committed to doing this, and I could probably sit around and talk to you guys all day, but I would much rather just let you know that that's what I'm doing, and I want to keep doing it, and God bless you.
Real quick, David. You mentioned something that I think might be beneficial if folks are joining us from outside of the Phoenix area.
Mhm.
So talk a little bit about the location of the Health and Human Services campus and what you mean by tents and such.
Okay, so the Human Services compound is at 12th Avenue and Jackson. Cass, which is the oldest shelter there, is still there. They still have hundreds of people in that shelter. But outside of that area right there, between 9th Avenue and 15th Avenue, at this point, our last count was they were living in tents, just basic tent type situations. There's 1,100 people in those tents all around there. They do everything that they fix their, I mean, they can go inside and say, this is the fall and eat. They can eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They can go to St. Joseph to work for jobs. They can go to community bridges for housing, to be put on this for housing and stuff like that. It's a one-stop shop, actually. But there's a lot of people that's getting on board with this thing because all over that area and all over Arizona and all over Phoenix right now, there's people with programs that can assist homeless people. Lots and lots and lots of programs. So those tents, and the only thing I can think about with those tents is that every now and then they come through because they have to clean. So all of those people have to get all that stuff together. Inside the compound, we got big trash cans. It's a storage space for them to put their stuff. They can put at least some of it. And everybody that we find housing for, they want to take all of that stuff with them. That won't happen. Some people got 2 dogs, they won't rent to them because they got too many dogs. There's different reasons why people are continuing to be homeless. Some people refuse to allow that to happen. They would rather stay in a tent than to give up their pets. I've seen people like that. Some people are chronically homeless, and then I'm going to say this and I'll let it go. I got a guy a place, very nice apartment. He was there for about a month before he got evicted. The reason for that was we could not make this guy sleep inside. He would take his backpack and his bedroll outside. They kept warning him, you can't sleep outside, you can't sleep outside. That was his comfort zone. So there's a lot of things that keeps the homeless population intact and outgrowing. And these are the types of things that we have to do together to show that there's a better way, to show that we care, to show that here, reach down, pick you up, do whatever the case might be. There's a thin line between enabling and helping people. I like both because I'll go that extra mile. Does that kind of answer that?
It does. Thank you. I appreciate that. Anybody else have any questions here in the room first? We have one here.
I do. So I drove by that area a couple weeks ago. I was surprised by the number of tents. Are those tents then sanctioned by CAS or the campus, or they're outside the campus, right?
They're outside the
Okay.
campus, and actually our security kind of works that area, but mostly it's for the compound itself, the people on the
Okay, and
inside.
they're on the outside.
Yeah, and the city of Phoenix Police Department kind of does that. I mean, there's been shootings, there's been all kind of stuff down there. Now, our idea about some of that real quick is that the drug dealers are also there.
Yeah.
They're also in that area. That means, if you get $1, they'll take that too. So that's another problem. So the city of Phoenix Police Department monitors a lot of that stuff down there. Now security is also on campus. Our security never wore guns before. But now, some of the security guys have, in case they breach that gate, if they're doing whatever, and come inside for those hotels.
How often do they run the sweeps?
I'm not really sure, they have not done one since I've been there, but I know that they do those. And I've been there a lot, like right now, like a month and a half.
Okay.
So I'm kind of new to the compound, but not new to the situation or the causation of homelessness. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, they have to do that. Yeah, in those places.
Don't go anywhere. Anybody online? Does anybody online have any questions? I'm gonna look at the chat here to make sure. That looks weird. So go ahead, anybody. The chat does not look normal, so I'm just gonna go, hey, why don't y'all just unmute yourself and ask the question? Looks like Gail's trying to unmute herself, perhaps. Yeah,
Yes.
go ahead. What's your question?
Well, my question is, I put it in to the person who's there for AZ Coalition, Housing Coalition. Where and how does one find information about establishing transition housing? Are there rules and regulations about? Is it governed, by anyone, a body, or state services, or what hoops does it? If there was a church congregation who wanted to develop something, where are the resources to learn? Anyone?
But I did hear one word that's kind of a magic word that comes to me when you talk about transitional housing. Because one of the things that's popping up all over the place are places that they're calling transitional housing. Now, there's a difference between transitional housing and like these halfway houses that's popping up all over the place for formerly incarcerated people. Also, the transitional housing that people are coming with, they accept vouchers. Now, you can get vouchers just like Section 8 vouchers. You can get vouchers and stuff like that via the city of Phoenix. And you can also get vouchers from the Human Services Compound, which is where I work. We also have access to vouchers. There's a process to the whole thing. You have to have been homeless for this amount of time. You have to do this, you have to do that. So there's a criteria for all of the actual housing components, including the transitional housing. But there's a lot of that happening right now, transitional housing, where people are turning things into houses that will allow people to move off the streets, to move out of the shelters and stuff like that. And they assist in all the ways that it takes to do that. There's monies available to help them get started. There's monies available for furniture and all the stuff that they're going to be moving into these places. There's a lot of money to do this. And there's always jobs and stuff available also for our people.
Awesome. I hope that answered your question, Gail. And Katie, can you lower his hand or her hand? Sorry.
Ellie, we
I
have
can.
both Joan and Wendy have their hands up to you to respond.
Yep, definitely saw that. Awesome. So go ahead, Joan. Go ahead, and she's going to respond as well.
Hi, everybody. Joan Service with the Arizona Housing Coalition. First, I want to say, David, thank you so much for your service to our community. We may have met, but what's clear is that you have a passion for service, and that's evident even through the Zoom. So just thank you for your passion. So we do have experts. I know Wendy's on the phone or on the Zoom, and she's got her hand raised. Ultimately, Gail, to answer your question, when it comes to operating, whether it be a shelter or housing program, there's a lot of, hoops and regulations. HUD is the main federal, the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Agency at the federal level gets the big pots of money, and they push it down to cities, to the states, and the state and the cities then distribute it to nonprofits like the Human Services Campus where David works. And the Justice Center where Wendy works. We also have on the call, I see Jack, there's a lot of experts in the field working diligently. I will say, as David mentioned, there are funds available to address, the housing crisis that too many of our Arizonans find themselves. But you know what? Homelessness is a very complex issue. You meet one person who's experiencing homelessness, you've met one person. They all have intersectional issues, and it's all steeped in, the structural racism that exists in both employment and housing going back many, many centuries. So I'm just going to stop and get off my soapbox and just really give it up to David and to Wendy and to Jack, who are, well steeped in this information and just so appreciative of being here and being a part of this conversation. And shout out to Karen, who I see in the room.
Thank you for that.
And Wendy, you wanted to share something as well, and then we'll have Zaid, and then we have another question here in the room. Go ahead, Wendy.
Hi, I'm Wendy Johnson. I'm from Justa Center, and we specialize in older adults in homelessness or at risk of homelessness. And I wanted to address the question about transitional housing. So a while ago, the government decided that transitional housing wasn't a funding priority. And so it was going to shelters and rapid rehousing, which is a short-term voucher for housing that declines in value every month, like a bootstrap to get people on their feet. However, the new HUD has come out with, it used to be one voucher per address thing. And now we can do a shared housing environment where if each person has their own lease, then we could accept multiple vouchers for like a shared living environment. A lot of folks return to homelessness because they can't trust their roommate to pay rent, or they get caught up in something and they can't pay rent. And so transitional housing is a great way for us to bridge people doing that. There's a group here in the Valley through St. Vincent de Paul. It's called Ozanam Manor. It's an extraordinary transitional program for adults. But for the most part, transitional housing has a tendency to look like a sober living house. And the other aspect with homelessness and housing is that if housing isn't near transportation hubs, then it's pointless. Right. If they can't get to doctor's appointments, jobs, health appointments, then the return to homelessness is just months, if not weeks away, because they don't know how to transition back. The longer one is in homelessness, the more your life skills depreciate. And I see that especially for our folks coming out of incarceration, is that they've spent 5, 10, 20 years in a congregate lifestyle and are dumped on the street without structural support and no transitional consistent. There are groups that do a great job at it, and I love what they do, but a lot of times it's more focused on their families and reconciliation with families. Well, we have a lot of folks showing up down to Justice Center that don't have any familial support, and they qualify for $115 in food stamps. Even though they're 64 years old, they can't get Medicare because you have to have 20 quarters of employment to qualify for Social Security's advanced amount. And so, they'll get $500 from Social Security, which is not a living amount. So there's, like Joan said, there are so many layers of can we, could we, should we. The low-income housing dropped off the radar for a long time here in the Valley. Zoning laws are prohibitive. I worked with CAS for almost a year for one gentleman who had been incarcerated for murder and arson. And we didn't have a problem with his murder conviction getting him housing, but none of the landlords wanted the arson conviction because their insurance wouldn't cover it. And so every person has this unique situation, and one size definitely doesn't fit all. But I encourage churches to look at ways to get engaged with this. I come from a long line of faith community work, and we could do this as a community of faith. We could make Phoenix a benchmark city for ending homelessness and dealing with addiction and mental health issues. And I was just telling someone today before I left our center, if you go into homelessness without an addiction or without mental health issues, you will not leave homelessness the same way, because the challenge of living on the street is too great.
And you know, Wendy, we are going to continue more with you if you're still available to be on in a little bit, but I want to get to Zaid.
Yeah,
And
please.
if I pronounce that properly, and then I want us to go into our breakout rooms, okay? Is that okay? Cool, thank you. Zaid.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Zaid Evans, and this is more a question for David. I live off of 17 and Cactus, and there's been a meth clinic that came up, and I know that there's a lot of complexities surrounding homelessness, but it just seems like, is there communication between these helping services? Because it seems like that's an island that was created that has exacerbated the homelessness within our neighborhood, and these empty lots, and the obviously, just this resource guarding, if you will, of what little they have, right, is going on, and it's horrible. And I try to engage as much as we can with the communities and the services that the police offer here in our neighborhood, and they are constantly saying, don't give them food card, don't give them this, don't, but I mean, so my question is, what services are coming together to help with that infrastructure, to where it's not just this island of helping this drug addiction, and it just seems like this perpetual never-ending circle that's just getting worse?
Well, once again, that old saying that it takes a village, and that's kind of what the concept is of what we're talking about. Khalil and I are definitely involved in that whole concept and philosophy. The other thing too is, I have to say this before I talk about anything in the Justice Center. I just went there about 4 days ago. I had never been there before, had seen it a number of times and didn't even know what it was. I went there and took a tour of that just about last week, actually, for the 55 and over, and they have showers. That's a fantastic program that's sitting there a lot of people don't even know about. But once again, I think when I mentioned it takes a village, but it's about the people. It's about the communities themselves. It's about education. It's about getting the word out. It's about putting it out there to where people know exactly what's going on. If there's a facade of people that works around and do certain things, community has no idea. They just complain about what they see. They have no idea what it takes to alleviate some of this stuff. So I think that's going to be a big picture, so just get people involved and get them go into the communities and let them know what resources are available and all those types of things. I think that's part of the answer. That's not the whole answer, but it's part of it, and a big part.
David, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And Zaid, hang around, because at the end, that's one of our last conversations, where our last discussion conversation will be about what does the village look like that David was talking about, right? And so, David, I have tripped across you in many different community organizing settings since 2016. And I must say that it is just an honor and a pleasure to be doing this work with you. And I love that we get to do it in this capacity. And as what was noticed online is your heart. I don't know what your faith practice is, but I see a spirit in you that is moving. So thank you. Thank you so much. Khalil, we got discussion groups, right?
All right.
I know people hate discussion groups, so this is an invitation. If you don't want to go into a breakout room, if you can rename yourself with a star with an asterisk, please do so, because I'd much rather you hang around than lose you because we did discussion groups, okay?
I have to auto assign.
I can.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
It's ready to auto assign.
First discussion for tonight. What is your understanding of homelessness? And later on, we will go into the myths of homelessness. So what is your understanding of homelessness? And be frank, be honest, no right or wrong answers. So take that into your breakout room. Number one.
Well, how did your guys, as while that's happening, how did your conversations go with folks here? I can handle the virtual. Ellie, if you want to work on the room until he gets it fixed. So you can share in the room. We'll share here right now. How did your conversations go? What's one thing you walked away with? I'll ask my former pastor, Jan, what's one thing you walked away with and hearing?
Well, the problem was there was only me in my room, and then Ellie was going to send me to another room, and that didn't work. So I just kind of made a cup of coffee.
Oh, okay. Well, so you talk to yourself. I think that's a solution to everything, especially tech problems. Just go make a cup of coffee.
Go make a cup of coffee. As you know, I have a number of experiences with homelessness and those experiencing homelessness. So
Absolutely. Yeah. What about you, Nancy?
I don't know how many Nancys there are, so I know there's two of us.
But you,
Okay, so there were 4 in our breakout session. I think we came from different parts of Phoenix plus Yuma, and we all had particular situations that we could share with as far as our homelessness experiences. I think we shared with Gail a couple of resources. So, and 2 of the 4 of us are working with a program called iHelp, which is interfaith homeless emergency lodging program.
What about you, Pastor Sylvia?
We talked about the complexities of homelessness, the challenges within the system that seem to contribute to homelessness, but then also the what I'm going to call wraparound service approach to addressing and helping individuals facing homelessness. We were in with Jack, and so he was able to share with Tom and I a lot of what his work is and the total, like I said, wraparound care approach, that it's not enough to provide a house or living space for the individuals, but to really address and get down into those things which impede success, essentially. So we didn't share so much about individual experiences, but rather homelessness in a general sense, and then the addressing of it.
Awesome. Well, Ellie, for time, I don't know how many more you want.
Well, we have 2 more minutes for
Okay.
folks here.
What about Reverend Kimberly Scott? Almost Reverend Dr. Kimberly Scott, I hear.
Thank you. We just talked about, again, the complexities of homelessness and some of the things that make that can take a family, even a middle-class family, from a place of being housing insecure to being housing insecure. And I just shared my story about me being in a place of transition due to my recent divorce, and the rising prices of rent and being priced out of a market, going from having a mortgage of $1,000 to now having to with single income, having to afford, housing, hopefully, purchasing something, but even to rent in that price range is virtually impossible what I was paying for my mortgage. So it just creates multiple problems. I also shared how, from my own personal experience as well, the challenges of renting when you're dealing with a lot of corporate renters. As a person who is in the faith community doing a lot of justice work, I was involved in a protest and was charged with with felony, what's it called, felony trespassing at Christina Cinema's office, and that was reversed, or dismissed. However, it's still out there on my record somewhere. So when I applied for a temporary housing situation apartment, I was denied access. And this is a person I've never gotten into any major trouble. So it's really easy for people to slip into housing insecure, a place of housing insecurity. So there's a lot of complexities that we need to look at, and just some shifting of laws in the state to make it so that people have access, and the legal stuff is being also looked at in regards to how it impacts us. But I've worked in a variety of contexts with homelessness since about 2012, working in a women's shelter that moved from church to church every evening. And so it was once a week, and a very similar thing with Family Promise here in the state of Arizona at my current church. And so I know that the problem is pervasive. I know that there's not one category of people or persons that end up in housing insecure environments. So I have just a passion for us to just kind of get organized and get together to see what we can do. I was really disappointed. I know at one point there was talk about a huge shelter that was being supposed to be built in the Phoenix area, and there was money that was put aside for that at some point legislatively, and that money was redistributed to other programs. And I'm curious if anyone knows, is there still any possibility of there being a large-scale homeless housing complex in Phoenix, as was discussed, I think it must have been 2 years ago, and the funding was there, and then all of a sudden that funding went towards other programs. And also mentioned the voucher system. I think the voucher system was one of those programs, but I'm not sure if that is where all that funding went.
That's a great question. I would defer to Joan and Wendy on that. I know just from my experience that the City Council of Phoenix won't open a lot more, but I would defer to Wendy and Joan. Do either of you know?
Yeah, I think you spoke exactly to that. There was there was a push for increased bed capacity down at the Human Services campus. The city of Phoenix, I think, is wanting to do a more boutique type approach, in the sense, when I say boutique, I mean smaller scale, not concentrated in one area. And I think that, like it or not, I think that would also, there's a struggle. There's like a push and pull. It pushes it out so that it's not just one community being, bearing the sole responsibility, but as a service provider, you want to have, the beauty of the Human Services campus is that there's so many different resources right then and there. So it's a mixed bag.
So I'm just wondering about the funding. Is the funding still there? Has it been distributed? Because I was told at one time some of that money was going to places like UMOM, which UMOM does a great job, but it's not providing more beds. So I'm just curious about where that money is in terms of creating more beds for people who are experiencing, housing insecurities right now.
So, and Wendy, please interrupt me. You're more of an expert than I, but in terms of money, I would say that before the pandemic, it was abysmal in terms of, federal, state, local partners were a little bit more willing to dedicate resources. They say all politics are local. So city council folks were more interested in dedicating resources to addressing, shelter and affordable housing. But right now, because of all of the federal COVID-19 relief packages, the CARES Act and the Rescue Plan, there's an influx of dollars. It's time limited. So at some point that big faucet of funds will turn off, and we'll be left. What I am seeing some amazing progress by, though, our shelter service providers and our affordable housing programs. I've been invited to more grand openings and groundbreakings in the past couple of years than ever because of this increased dollars. But at the same time, COVID also affected and impacted so many households, people losing their jobs. So it's almost like we're not pushing the ball forward as much as we had hoped.
Well, and Kimberly, that is a really good question. And Joan, thank you so much. You're such an asset. It's been a pleasure to see you on all of these different calls. And I want to go back and give a shout out to David, who in chat, there was a lot of love for you in chat. And to this group here in the room in person, when we weren't eating all the delicious food that Camille picked up for us, we were definitely having a wonderful conversation about the history, our personal experiences, our personal interactions with folks. And so with that, I want to continue to be respectful of folks' time. I would love to turn it over to Wendy. And then when Wendy's done, we're going to come back. We're going to just check in with our bodies, and then we'll go out into a breakout. We'll pose another question for us, and we'll go out into probably our final breakout room. So we're going to find our next Wendy, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And it's a delight to be here tonight. Social justice is something that I feel like gets either no press or bad press. And really, that's the issue we're fighting every day in our communities because of embedded biases and long-term traditions that we have not identified as being negative in that way. One of the reasons why we don't have affordable housing is that Maricopa County zoning is what I call fence friendly. They're all about planned communities and gated communities, and those things seem to get built, but every time somebody wants to build something affordable or dense, every NIMBY comes out of the underground. I mean, it's very maddening for me to see us ignoring probably one of the greatest workforce crises that this state will ever see, because we can't afford to pay people what they need to pay for rent or to own a home from an economic point of view, and we can't afford not to have them. So I want to focus in a little bit on the role of incarceration with older adults. I think it was Kim that just shared about being arrested for protesting and that affecting her. The effects of having an arrest or a conviction is a compounding issue the older you get as well, because there's not a way to go back and necessarily expunge what's happening. What we're seeing at Justa is a lot of folks who got 1 or 2 hits early on for marijuana or some low-level street drug that when they got out had no recourse but to continue in that lifestyle, either as a dealer or a distributor or to go to crime because they couldn't get housing, they couldn't get jobs. The requirement to report your convictions on an application, it allowed a lot of our seniors to decay before they ever became seniors. They went backwards, and the hole got bigger and bigger and bigger. And related to that, I'll tell you about one guy we have who is probably one of the sweetest human beings I've ever met. And he spent most of his adult life in jail, not continuously, but in and out. And he told me a couple of years ago, he said, when I'm in jail, I can be drug and crime free. When I'm on the street, I cannot. And I use, and I'm a pimp, and I do all these things to make ends meet. I don't know how to live the way I lived in prison in terms of clean and sober in my neighborhood when I'm living in a wheelchair. And so, he started out with marijuana offenses that just got worse and worse and worse. And so, he's 65 years old and has such a degraded health that now he's in an electric wheelchair, and he's still sleeping in a tent outside the Human Services campus. The other group of people we see greatly marginalized are sex offenders. And that's one of the things that's the hardest to reconcile, because nobody wants a pedophile living near a school, right? We all know that. But on the other hand, we have some old sex offenders older sex offenders who were convicted at 19 and are now 60 and have not reoffended, haven't been caught reoffending, but can't live anywhere where there's affordable housing because there's always children in schools around them. So, we don't have a good system for dealing with folks who have been penalized through the incarceration system. I also think there's a lot of intentional and unintentional bias by landlords and others to not want those people in their neighborhood. And, Kate, I think it was Katie that said in our breakout room that when she was first exposed to homelessness, she said, I realized they were just like me. And that's the issue, I think, for Justice Center is, I was your neighbor till I became homeless, and now I'm your enemy. And you assume all these bad things about me when I'm the same person who lived next door to you. So for seniors entering homelessness right now, the majority are due to gentrification and high rent increases. 40% of our new clients last year were first-time homeless. Majority were women over the age of 70. So we have some demographics in older adults that are going to be continuing, even if we have every other homeless problem solved except for chronic homelessness. The elder homelessness will continue to climb exponentially over the next 8 to 10 years. And of course, our government every few years wants to fund Social Security and Medicare, which I did a rough calculation. That would be 500,000 seniors in Maricopa County would be at risk of homelessness within 90 days. We are not prepared for that as a country or a community. And so I think we need to get more creative in how we're handling housing, how we're using space. A church in my neighborhood just sold off extra parking and green space to a developer who, of course, wanted to build apartments, and my neighborhood shot it down because that would bring those people in a lot of cars. So now they're doing luxury homes. And that's okay with my neighborhood, except that it's going to, instead of housing 270 people, it's going to house 70 who already can afford housing. So it's a complicated environment to become poor as an older adult. Aging into poverty is a real thing, and it's frightening. Questions?
Yes, we have one here, if I can, real quick. We're gonna get the room first, and then we're gonna hit you all online. Gail, hang on, I saw your hand. Thank you. Go ahead, Holly.
So aside from issues, like somebody who has a drug conviction or, I don't understand how somebody who is 70, 75 can be homeless. Like, is it because the Social Security benefits are not enough? I guess some of them may not get Social Security benefits, is it just that there's not enough affordable housing for them? Like,
It's
just like a massive failure of society that we can have an elderly person homeless.
So there, like our discussion of one size does not fit all for homelessness, the causes of seniors becoming homeless are varied. It can be a medical crisis. During COVID, we had a number of seniors who were admitted to the hospital and were on ventilators and were unconscious, and no one was paying their rent. So they got evicted. We got 6 or 8 people. We have the folks who are deciding to take care of their children's problems at their own expense. We had a lady who paid her son's bail continuously every time he got arrested until she couldn't pay her rent anymore. So she got evicted, and he continues down his path of problems. We have children and friends and family members who are stealing what little money seniors get by controlling them and abusing them. We have dysfunctional families or geographically diverse families. So, my daughter lives in Lake Tahoe and I'm homeless here. I'm going to lie to her. I'm not going to tell her I have problems. I'm just going to tell her I'm staying with friends, or I rented a new place, or whatever. because I'm too embarrassed at my age to admit that I'm homeless. We see these compounded things. Also, when a spouse dies, if the spouse is the greater Social Security benefit, regardless, the spousal benefit gets reduced by half. So couples that were able to make ends meet on 2 Social Security checks and a little bit of a pension or other things, now all of a sudden, 1/2 of that one income is gone. It's just history. Another is that a lot of folks here in the Valley are in a second or a third marriage relationship, but choose not to legally marry because they both have adult families and they don't want to blend their economic issues. So when one of the partners dies, the family comes in and wants to sell the house, and they give buy us out or we'll buy you out ultimatum. And then that person discovers that they can't rent anything in the Valley because we're at least at a 6-month waiting period. The other is, for example, I pulled my Social Security. If I retire at 67, I will make $1,800 a month. I can't qualify for any kind of rental unit because you have to have 3 times income. So if your Social Security is $700, you can't not only pay rent, but you can't even qualify for rent. And so there's a lot of complicating issues that come into play. The housing market crash played a role in that it cut people's retirement funds way down at a point where they were in crisis. I mean, it is as many faces as there are of elders going into homelessness. There is a theme, and decaying mental health, physical health, and memory play a role with them aging much quicker on the streets and dying younger than they would have to.
Thank you, Wendy. I think, Gail, go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, how do we get the ears and agenda of elected officials, but at whatever level, city, county, state, attention to this, and who is already in office, who we could talk with to learn more pathways, avoid the pitfalls, know where to have attention.
My experience, I've been here 4 years, and what my experience is that homelessness and older folks are not part of the economic engine that fuels decision making. And so it's like our schools being poorly funded. We have an agenda that is not human first for many of our politicians, and they get sucked into whatever's the sexiest of the campaign issues. I personally think we should ask the government to step out of homelessness, other than providing funding for social services. I think community needs to solve this. I think, I said this a little while ago, I think communities of faith could actually solve this if we could work together and put away some of our own. I will admit I'm from an evangelical background. And one of the things that happened when I was on the mission field and a pastor at a church was that we would see something that people are doing really great, and we'd reinvent it inside our own church. So that diversifies the impact. It lacks community and well thought out. And for a lot of us, it runs out of steam if someone who's championing it is no longer involved. So I think, communities like the Arizona Faith Network and denominational networks really could play a role in this. I look at the Beatitudes Campus of Care and its spinoff of Duet that came out of the Beatitudes. There are ways for us as people of faith to do something impactful, and not have to ask the government to approve it in terms of financially funding it. We just don't have the will to do it yet. That's my opinion, my experience. It's not probably fact-based at this point. But I'm at the point of saying we as a community need to solve our issues and then tell the government, here's how we're going to use money that you're getting from the feds to take care of the poor and the underserved and the widows and the fatherless, because we have a plan. And there are a lot of groups out there that are doing that, but it's on such a micro scale that it becomes difficult to even scale it up because of the bureaucracy of nonprofits. We still have some of the same issues that government has. And the cost of operations is never funded by anybody. So the capital to purchase affordable housing units to convert is greater than what you could ever pay off. So no one will fund it. You know, a 20-unit apartment complex might be 12 million. You cannot charge enough to maintain that apartment complex. And so that's part of the problem we're experiencing today. Isn't necessarily a lack of desire to build affordable housing or to have affordable housing. It is our inability to reconcile that with the economic engine of our community.
There's such rich conversation tonight. Wendy, you continually blow my mind. To have the people in the room that we have tonight, not just David, not just Wendy, not just Katie, David, Khalil, and all the folks, but really it's all of us in this space having this open conversation. And what I liked about what Wendy shared leads us into kind of what Zaid was saying earlier, which was you can dream of something different. You can imagine. Wendy is imagining different ways in which to serve those folks. Our ancestors, our elders, we need and they deserve for us to dream. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Khalil, and he's going to we'll send you back into breakout groups. If you don't want to join, stay behind. But Khalil, what's that question?
Next question. Next and final question. How can you imagine a future where everyone is housed and treated with dignity?
Yep, and we'll give 15 minutes.
How can you imagine a future where everyone is housed and treated with dignity?
Open.
We'll see you in 15 minutes. We'll be checking in. Yeah.
And also,
we're finishing up our conversation. You're joining us live. So I just wanted to share. I want to thank everybody, first of all, in this space too. I hope your conversations online were as good. I want to just highlight really quick a couple things that came up here. Is there was a lot of dreaming that was happening, right? There was a lot of who is doing the work, because like David said, it's being done, right? And we're talking about the distribution of money from a personal level to a corporate level to a nonprofit level. And I think that what I heard that reflected Wendy's conversation was, one, we can't really think about the church as a nonprofit model because, like you said, Wendy, the nonprofit model mirrors itself after the government. And I think you also said something about we need to get the government out. So if we need to get the government out, perhaps we can reimagine what nonprofits are. And for those of you or us, all of us here that are in faith-based settings, what is our faith driving us to do? How is our faith asking the question for us to do something different? Wendy, I just wanted to give a shout out. I got an email from you, and it only dawned on me, one of our participants here in the room, she shared her story and she talked about setting a boundary.
And I got an email from you that said you only check email twice a day. And you were very clear on why. And I just want to congratulate you on setting the boundary and doing this work, because I know how hard that is. What did the group online have to share? Katie, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I'm going to kick it over to Reverend Kimberly. I know she's.
Wow. I was just commenting about, I think it was Wendy's comment regarding kicking the government out of the work that we're doing and letting faith communities take this thing on. And I'm all for that. I would love for that to happen. But I think the problem with that is that we have to stop seeing ourselves as Christians or as faith people who do not have our own political agendas, right? Because we are where we are because we do have our own political agendas. But the point is that the way that we need to solve this problem is that we have to get back to the basics, that everyone deserves to live a life of human dignity. And in order to live a life of human dignity, you must have water, food, and shelter. We have to ignore who you're sleeping with, what your gender identity is, what your denominational or non-denominational affiliation is, what your practices or your belief around salvation or personal salvation is. And if we can get to that basic level, then we can get work done. But even as faith communities, we'll never get anything done if we don't first go back to basic loving a human for being a human being and letting us make sure that we are taking care of folks because they are simply human and they deserve to live lives of human decency that requires them to have food, water, and shelter. And that also means that when you see things happening in your community where, they're not approving low-income housing, then some of us need to get up and say something, see something and say something. Let's just let these things happen and us just sit back and not say anything. Because it's one thing to say this around a table where we're comfortable with our peers, but until this choir gets out and starts singing outside and we start convincing other people in our church communities to do the same thing, the problem will continue to be the same. But we can't ignore that that we are political beings. And if we can't stop first at just the basic thing of humanness and human necessity and what it means to live as a human, then we'll never solve this problem. That's basically was my thesis.
Amen. Preach. That was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Doctor. Thank you. Anybody else online? Go ahead.
Just
John.
in the spirit of brainstorming, in terms of, envisioning a world in which more people are housed, we talked about tiny houses. We talked about, an expansion of mobile home park type housing, because that might cause less of a knee-jerk reaction of, no, people can't imagine it. We can imagine it because they're everywhere, and it's quite popular in the Southwest and Arizona. We talked about, the older demographic of, more and more older people. I forget what the stats are, but like the number of people turning 65 or older, every day is like in the thousands. And so, and that's a sleeping giant from a political standpoint. Theodore Roszak, who wrote a book, The Making of the Counter Generation, I think it was, in 68, 40 years later, wrote a book called The Making of the Elder Generation, about how the baby boomers could tap into their political power if they, were to pull together. And I think we see something similar happening in relation to, the push to overcome the gun lobby. It's like we're starting to realize, we are a sleeping giant. Like even gun owners now are saying, this is insane. We have to pass some sensible laws. And so how can we leverage the political power that we're sitting on? That was pretty much what we came up with.
That was powerful. Thank you, Tom. And I know a lot of folks at AFN participate for these type of settings, but they really participate for this companionship in that legislative process. I hope I used that term properly. Companionship in the advocacy through the legislative process, just as one of the many things that Arizona Faith Network does. Hey, y'all, we have so many more cafes coming up where we are going to continue to have these rich conversations.
we're going to continue to explore the different ideas and different ways for us to imagine things. If you attended this event, be expecting an email and or a phone call from me for a one-on-one. It's this approach that Arizona Faith Network has done in different ways for a while now. But our intent has grown and been cultivated from what we've learned in the past couple of years. And so you get to spend time with me. And if not me, and you prefer Khalil, which I know the majority of you do, he's busy, he can't take your calls, you have to talk to Ellie. Anyway, before I turn it over to Khalil, I just invite us to settle in one more time. If you get an opportunity wherever you are, take a look behind you. What's behind you? Look up to the ceiling and down to the ground. If you're on Zoom, take a look at those Hollywood squares. If you're here in this room, take a look at one another and send yourself this blessing and send those people around you this blessing. May you be at peace. May you feel safe. And may you know that you are loved. Breathe it in. And let it all out. Khalil, what's up? What's next? What's next?
All right, thank you, Ellie. So what's next is we don't never, if you engaged us in these smart justice cafes in the past, you know we don't just talk about things, we move it to action. So when you leave here tonight, this is one of many conversations. Think about who needs to be in the room. And some of y'all in the Hollywood squares, think about who wants to be involved. You know, what officials do we need to get in the room, right? How do we add that pressure? But then also think about the people in the community who can help us carry this out. Because I've made a comment today, I believe in this model. I'm young, but I'm old school. I look like I'm 80, but I'm only 13. No.
I feel like David looks younger than you.
I know. So I say this, I said, we can get this accomplished with what we waste. Think about that. When you leave here today, we can get all this accomplished with what we waste. There's millions of dollars given to research homelessness. How do we put that to action? Okay, so be looking for a follow-up email about the next cafe, or email us. We can set up some one-on-ones to discuss what it looks like to participate in that, to outreach others. The other thing is, the biggest thing is, right now we have heat relief centers going on across Maricopa County. Katie, do you have those locations? But you know, we're driving people or getting people the information to know where those heat relief centers are. So you know, the hours vary, but pretty much during the hottest parts of the days, people are able to get off and get out of the heat and get into some cooling centers. That's one of the things we have going on. But you know, the call to action is we have to start moving people on this, because it's not going to do anything but get worse. I agree with Wendy that people think that the solution is going to come out of the sky. It has to come from the community. It's going to come from the ground up. So, you know, stay connected to us. Think about that next cafe. Who do we need to get into the room? Because I'm really good at dragging people in, officials. And let's get them to get some commitments moving forward. We're tired of the talk. Year after year, we hear the same talk. Okay. So go ahead.
Do we have leaders? Is there something about leaders training something? Is that
Yeah.
what else we get?
So one of the things we talked about, which we will implement it this year, is train the trainers. So these cafes, anybody can hold them. So we want to train the trainer. We want to train other leaders to host these cafes. And, you know, the biggest thing about action is sometimes you have to keep the conversations going and don't let it die down. So we will be looking to train people, get them in the room, show them how to facilitate these cafes. And that's another way we were effective pre-pandemic. You know, we had several cafes going on in different faith communities. You know, and I want to leave you with this. There are a number of faith communities that own land.
Amen.
I'll just say that. Throughout this state, they own a lot of land, and they've been holding on to that. So if we can get housing built, shelter, whatever it looks like, that's a start right there. So I'm gonna leave you on that note.
Thank you, everybody.
And I want to thank you all for coming. I know it's, you know, late, but, you know, I appreciate you sticking around.